we are where we are today because the choices we made yesterday. Therefore, the choices we make today will determine our future, whether in poverty or abundance.
Hello, Sales Nation, and welcome to the Salesman Podcast live in partnership with HubSpot and recorded at the Leadership Summit in Chicago. On this episode, we have Manny Alamwala, and I hope, Manny, that I've somewhat pronounced that right, mate. Sorry if I hasn't. Manny is the creator of the Sales Journal. It is fantastic. You can find out more about that over at salesjournal.co. And on this episode, we're diving into the 7 habits of highly effective SDRs. We don't get all the way through 7, and I'll have Manny back on to dive into the rest. But this is a fascinating episode. You can find out more about the Sales Journal, Manny, everything else that we talk about in the show notes to this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. And with all that said, let's jump in to today's episode. Manny, welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Will.
You're more than welcome, sir. So you're speaking here at the Leadership Summit. Your talk, 7 Habits of Highly Effective SDRs. I wanted to give the SDRs in the audience a bit of love, give them a bit of attention. And so I want to leverage your talk and go through it in today's episode of the show. So with that said, out of the 7, because we're not going to get through, probably we're barely going to get through one of these, I imagine, because they go so deep with them. But what is the most highest leverage point or the highest leveraged habit of highly effective SDRs? What's the one out of all 7 of them that we should 100% be focusing on?
Good question. So the one thing that I've seen that really separates the average to the great is exactly what we're doing right now, is focus on one thing that day, that week, that year, and really schedule your time around accomplishing that one thing before you move on to the next. I find as an SDR, there's a lot of different things that we can focus on. And not only in sales, but in life, time is a very precious and limited resource. So wasting that time on switching tasks and losing focus, you don't get the results that you want, rather than just focus on one thing and just being a laser beam on that.
Let me ask you this. So that makes total sense. I know for me in the show, we kind of touched on this before we clicked record, that when I started salesman.red, the website, which is now salesmanpodcast.com, we did a magazine, we did blog content, we did video content, we did the audio content, we did the podcast on top of all that. And the podcast was the only thing that anyone ever cared about. It was the only thing that ever got me. So my metric for all of this is number of emails I get a day off the back of the content. So we could do amazing video, and it wouldn't be an interview, it would be me giving sales tips or whatever it was, and it would get views, but no one would email me and say, that was awesome. Whereas as soon as we started doing the podcast, I got lots of emails saying, that's awesome. So that was my kind of shining star. That was the one thing was told to me versus I had to uncover it. For an SDR, how do you know what that one thing should be? How do you know where you should be spending your time?
That's a good question, and it's one of those things with the chicken and egg scenario. It's like what comes first, and it's kind of figuring out what your end goal is. Where do you want to end up, and then work backwards from there. Obviously, there's basic skills that an SDR must cover. You got to be good on the telephone. You got to be good in writing with the emails and the messaging and persuasiveness. So it's whatever your end goal is, and then work backwards from there. It's like, okay, well, in my industry, a lot of people answer their phones. So I got to become really good at speaking on the phone, handling objections. So that one thing might be, practicing objections or handling or writing scripts for these type of objections, and then trying it out and see how it works.
So is the goal a bigger picture? It is to be the best on the phone within my organization, within the industry, or however you want to frame it, versus the one goal is to make so many calls a day?
You mean the overall big picture goal?
If you've got one thing, and that's the one thing you're focused on, should it be a binary metric of I'm going to make 20 calls today, 50 calls, whatever it is? Or should it be I'm going to be the best in my space, which then inadvertently means that you're probably going to have to make the calls to achieve that goal?
Yeah, so it depends what time frame you're looking at. So there's the longer term vision. It's like I'm going to be the best in my space. Now, what do I need to do to get there? So, for example, if you come in the next day, it's like, what's that one thing I want to focus on today? Well, what's the bigger picture look like? And then working backwards on there, what can I do today that will get me to that future state? Actually, so the reason I got into sales is there's this book called The Power of Focus. And in there they talk about habits. And there's a good quote in there that really changed the way I view everything. And it's, we are where we are today because the choices we made yesterday. Therefore, the choices we make today will determine our future, whether in poverty or abundance. And that just, it just hit me like a rock to the head. It was just like, okay, wow, like, so the choices I'm making today will affect me tomorrow, next week, 1 year from now, 5 years now, maybe the next generation, my kids,
Yep.
from the choices I made today. And that really just hit it home on how important every day is, and then those habits, how those habits make up of who you are in the long run.
I had that same realization, but from a far less pretty and useful quote of one of my mates from home, Keith, when we'd go out drinking. It would be that moment in the night, whether it's 11 o'clock, 2 o'clock, whatever it is, that you probably shouldn't drink anymore. And
Yeah.
he'd always say the same line of, "That's future Will's problem. Don't worry about that. That's future Will's." And I remember him saying this to me, and I just went, "You're right. It is. Like, if I don't have this next 5 beers that leads me to do something daft or silly or whatever it is,
Yeah.
that's going to change my future. What you do in that moment, and it's crazy
Yeah.
powerful. And on the back of that, I was sober for 4 years
Yeah.
straight afterwards, and that kind of like tied in with starting the business and a whole bunch of other things as well,
Yeah.
where I wanted to be kind of top of my game the whole time I could possibly be there. But yeah, it's it's same principle, but
Yeah.
a more ridiculous way of looking at it.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever works. Whatever works.
Good man. Okay, so the 7 habits here. If
Mhm.
having the one thing, I agree with this. The one thing is the most important.
Yeah.
What is the next most important, or what's the easiest to implement, perhaps?
Sleep. And it may be surprising. It's not something that a lot of people talk about, and it's not something that you see a direct result right away. It's that whole thing of building up over time. And I've been fascinated with sleep for a while now. I found that there's this culture sometimes in startup organizations, especially of sleep shaming, of people bragging about, hey, I only got 3 hours of sleep today, and I'm still able to do this. But I started looking into it more because I ended up being, okay, well, I'm only gonna sleep 4 hours a night because I want to accomplish as much as I can. But I found myself being very sleepy during the day, very drowsy, unfocused, and I was probably losing a lot of productivity hours because I wasn't sleeping rather than getting more hours in the day. And I started Googling and successful people and their sleep habits. So say Kobe Bryant's sleep habits or this person's sleep habits. And I found a lot of these people actually sleep a lot. And I went into the science of it, how that's the time where our body repairs, our brain repairs, and with what the recommended hours of sleep is, you're more productive during the day. You don't lose focus.
So I can nerd out with you on this because I
Yeah.
love the do you know the phrase biohacking?
Biohacking, yeah.
So I love all this stuff, and anywhere we can pull data and analytics into things like sleep, and
Yeah.
I've tracked all this, and then its effect on my performance
Yeah.
day to day. And I went through a good period of sleeping 6 hours a night and getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'd be reading 3 or 4 books a week, and I'd be crushing it, going out to sales. This is when I was in medical device sales, and I was using all kinds of software and hardware to monitor my sleep cycles. I think at the time, I think Microsoft bought them, and then the watches started going on fire. So I think they've debunked the company now, defunct them. Of it was the company called Basis.
Okay.
So that does like heart rate tracking, but really sophisticated. It monitors your galvanic skin response, your perspiration, all this kind of stuff, and it gives you a really accurate monitor of your sleep cycle. So you can wake at the right moments. You can judge whether you need 2 or 3 sleep cycles that are 3 or 4 hours long, and all this good stuff. And I'm still crazy involved in it all now, and even to the point of I know quite a lot about, and this is totally going off topic, but like nootropics, smart drugs, all this kind of stuff, which is the world of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Of I know founders of companies over there that are taking Provigil or Medicinal, and that is affecting their sleep, and it's just not sustainable, right?
Yeah.
You can do all this stuff, you can hack it, and you can track it.
Yeah.
It's far easier just to have a good 8 or 9 hours sleep and be refreshed.
Yeah.
And that's, and am I right here? That's the long-term solution for a lot
Yeah,
of
and
this.
it's totally simple. For example, like one of the most successful business person in the world, we could say, is the founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, and he's an advocate for sleep. He would go out of his way to get his sleep. He would even bring a sleeping bag to work to make sure he got his sleep. So if this guy who built this amazing company, tech company, talks about building better sleep habits and getting more done, then there's something there, right?
So we'll link to, because I think we can get through a bunch of these now. I'll link
Yeah.
to a bunch of resources in the show notes to this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com on sleep. So we've got the biggest leverage, we've got the easiest. What's the most counterintuitive?
I'm not sure if this is counterintuitive, but one big thing is time blocking. So blocking in your calendar of what tasks you're going to do and being disciplined to do it. These days, there's a lot of distraction, especially if we're on our laptops. It's easy to switch to a website or go on LinkedIn and get caught up in the feed or check Facebook, or your phone's going off on your desk. It's time blocking and then being dedicated to that task in that time block, and then not doing anything until that time is up and moving on to the next thing. Now, it sounds easy, but it's very hard to implement, especially when you see blinking lights go off or notifications pop up. So you got to be strong enough to turn all that off. And you can tie that back in with sleep. If you don't have that sleep, then it's going to be easy to lose focus. And it's just the chemical in your body. It just works hand in hand in that way.
Do you have any ways to manage this?
I throw my phone in my you just got to be very disciplined. You put your phone in your bag. You turn off, if you're not using email, close the application down. Close any application that you're not using down, and you just set a timer to ring at that time when you're done.
So I am not disciplined. That's one of my flaws. So I have to put process in place. Have you come across the Pomodoro technique before?
Pomodoro, yes.
So I've got an app on my phone. I'll get it later. I'll put it in the show notes. We'll build a big resource list here, and it's a free app. And it literally, for anyone who doesn't know what the Pomodoro technique is, you work for 25 minutes and then you have a break for 5 minutes. And for me, I know I break my whole day into 25-minute chunks now. So I know for me to get the audio back from the podcast and for me to edit it and do show notes is two of these 25-minute chunks. So I hate doing the show notes. I hate doing all that stuff. I love doing the recordings. I love doing somewhat of the editing, but the show notes and it's procrastination. There's an element of this is the final hurdle before it goes public, and perhaps there's ego wrapped up in that, and there's the potential of rejection if 20 people email me saying that particular show was rubbish. So there's probably underlying things going on there that make me procrastinate over it. But when I know it's just going to be done in an hour's time, and it's as simple as that, then I can get it done. Versus before I started using the Pomodoro technique, I'd be like, I'll do it later on, and then I'd be like, right, well, it's 1:45, I'll do it on the hour, and then it would never get done, and it'd go on back and forth. So that was a real game changer for me, using that technique and just having my phone beep. And it's, again, you're using the same reward systems that make you want to answer email, and once you get in that flow and once you get going, then it's almost it is rewarding you for that next chunk of time. And once I get going, I don't want to stop. And then you've done 6-7 hours worth of like solid work, whereas before it would take me 4 or 5 hours just to get even started.
No, definitely. And you know what, building all these habits, I find we live in a world of instant gratification, and sometimes if you don't see results right away, that it can be very demotivating, or I'm going back to it's very easy to go back to what you did before, right? But with all these habits, you got to give it time, and you got to
But how do we do that? Because that's a simple thing to say.
It is
It's a
simple.
very difficult thing to put into practice.
And that's where you got to really dig and ask yourself some questions even before developing this habits of why you're doing what you're doing. Like what's that reason, and write it down. Like write it down and post it on your computer if that helps.
Well,
but if
Manny, you're in the SDR world.
Yeah.
What's on your computer? What's on that post-it? And I'll share what's on mine as well.
Yeah, for mine is very personal. I do what I do to help support my family, and like I said, what we do now affects our future. So now my family now, but my kids and their kids. So that's something that really drives me.
I've got 2 post-it notes. I've talked about it on the show before. One is a financial number, which isn't millions. It's not that unreasonable. I could probably go into a tech sales role and hit it quicker than doing the podcast.
Yeah.
To be fair, but it's a number that allows me to semi-retire, so I can do the podcast from home. I can be like part-time or stay-at-home dad. My girlfriend's a doctor, so she does crazy shifts. So I want to be against this family thing, which is a weird thing to project forward. So I've got no intentions of having kids anytime soon.
Yeah.
But when that time arises, I want to be there and kind of experience that.
Yeah.
And I've got another quote on, and this is the quote that led me to do the podcast live. Every time I find a bit of conflict or a barrier that needs to be broken through, this gets me through it every single time. And it was a Joe Rogan quote, one of the biggest podcasts on the planet. But I think other people have said it, and I think it's a stoic kind of message as well. Of you are, but Joe Rogan puts it in the kind of a modern perspective of you are the hero in your own story.
Okay.
Of you are in control of your life. If you visualize your life, if you see it as it's a movie, it's happening, and you're on this ride, then why wouldn't you want to be the hero in it? Why would you want to be kind of a side role? Why would you want to be like an extra member of cast in the background? And why wouldn't you want to do something incredible and make the most of it?
Yeah.
So those 2 things are, if I'm ever going, oh, I can't be bothered publishing an episode today, or I can't be bothered doing this, or I don't want to travel to the other side of the planet to do these live things, anything like that, that slight bit of negativity, they get me through it.
That's interesting. I like looking at it that way. You're the hero of your story. That's very interesting. You know, it brings me on that point where talking about stories and heroes, you know, where do we see that in movies? Now think about these actors or your TV hosts or even what you do with podcasts. Like if you wake up having a bad day and you still got to do the show, like the show must go on. And the same thing should apply in everything that you do in life, right? You just got to push through and go forward with it. And once you do it, then, you know, you're back into that rhythm. You kick yourself out of that habit and you start having that good day or that day towards what you want to achieve.
For sure. What's the hero's journey? And you're kind of taking a tiny little, like distilling it down into the micro here versus the macro of a film.
Yeah.
The hero's journey of everything's going nice and fine. There's Frodo plodding along in the Shire, and it's all going happy, and then something crazy bad happens, turns that individual's world on its head, and then they're fighting just to get things back to normal.
Yeah.
They're not fighting for a Porsche or to go on some crazy holiday.
Yeah.
They're fighting just back for normality. And as soon as we pitch that and bring that into our world of, whatever little thing, you get over it and then you'll get back to that normality.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably a way to take your mind out of the present, whatever's kind of roadblock is stopping you right there, and put it into the future where you want to be.
Yeah, and you know what? That applies like for the SDR audience. That's every day, right?
Yeah,
that's every day.
The weird thing is, and I'll let you finish, but I just wanted to interject there of the SDR. It's perhaps a lot of the time it's the first sales role that people get into out of college. It's not all the ways, but it's typically the least experienced people. They're getting the most rejection. They're getting the most phone slammed, kind of metaphorically most of the time speaking.
Yeah.
But they're kind of been through the push through the ring of fire more than anyone else. And so it is a daily thing. And I look back at my world in medical devices, it was very rare that I got any rejection versus, someone like yourself, an SDR. Must be all the time. So that's you've got to learn to manage that, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it goes back to these habits. But also, like I said before, it's like, why are you doing what you do? And if that belief is strong enough in yourself, and that belief has to be not only in yourself, but what you're trying to solve for your client as well. And if that belief is strong enough, then you'll climb that mountain, you'll jump through the fire, you'll walk on broken glass to save the day, right?
I love it. Well, Manny, I've got one final question.
Sure.
It's something I ask everyone that comes on the show, and that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling? I was going to try and twist it then to SDR specific, but just selling in general. So this is, selling to, friends, family, selling concepts, ideas.
Yeah.
What would be that one piece of advice?
Don't give up too early, especially if you believe in it. Yeah.
How did you learn that? Is that experience? Is that a specific case that you were told that if you were to carry on a bit further, you're gonna win?
Just experience. Once you've gone through that experience of like, if you really believe in it and you face a rejection, you get a no. You face a rejection, you get a no. You face a rejection, you find creative ways to overcome it and get it there. You start realizing the power that you have, and that power of that belief of if you really want to get there, there's creative and resourceful ways to get there.
Amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Well, with that, Manny, tell us a little bit about where we can find out more about you and the Sales Journal and everything that you're doing with that.
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter, Manny Alamwala. And the Sales Journal I created, I'm guessing it'll be in the show notes.
Yep.
You can find that at salesjournal.co.
Amazing stuff. Well, as I said, I'll link to that. I'm a huge fan of it. We've just been going back and forth looking through it now. I think it's a great resource for everyone from SDRs to, I'm going to experiment with it because it might improve my day and my workflow versus the kind of like just pads of paper that I use to all of this. So I appreciate that. I appreciate what you're doing for SDRs and kind of building your own personal brand. And we'll have you on in the show in the next not too distant future, and we'll kind of track your progress of it all. So I appreciate that, Manny, and I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.